Everyone, welcome to Tim's Vinyl Confessions. I'm Tim Derling. Thank you so much for watching. I've got a very special guest with me, a returning co-host, Peter Kerr from Rock Daydream Nation. Hello, Peter.
Hey, Tim, how's it going?
It's going great. And for the topic I wanted to discuss, I could think of nobody better to talk about this band than in any incarnation, because Peter is a self-described Deep Purple tragic. So he's a huge Deep Purple fan. And on this episode, I want to concentrate on the beginning. Deep Purple, Mark I.
Yes.
Richie Blackmore, Ian Pace, John Lord, Rod Evans, and Nick Simper. 3 albums recorded in a 2-year span. And of course, the band would go on to do many other groundbreaking things. And the Mark I Deep Purple kind of stands as its own thing. So I really wanted to go through each of the albums, a couple of compilations, and then we're going to talk about a little bit of an aftermath of the whole Deep Purple situation. So, Peter, I guess I'll start with you, because I think you've been into Purple longer. We talked a little bit about this before we started recording, but your introduction to Deep Purple, how did that come around?
My introduction to Deep Purple was a mate at school who had a compilation called Deepest Purple, the very best of Deep Purple. And this really focuses on Mark II and a little bit of a smattering of Mark III. And my mind was blown, because it was just the perfect marriage of neoclassical flash, hard rock. That was my entry position into heavy metal. And I fell in love with the band. But, I mean, we're talking about Mark I. It was only when I went into the catalogue, explored Mark II, Mark III, and then I went back to Mark I and realised that there was a whole new band, different sound, and they had a little bit of success in America. So it was sort of like history was slightly rewritten. The narrative was all Mark II, Mark III, and onwards. But Mark I in the early 80s and beyond has kind of been sort of erased. People don't realize that, and we will talk about it, they had a major hit in America with Hush that went top 5.
Yeah.
So it's a really interesting catalogue to explore, and I'm glad I'm on the show and we can, help our viewers navigate through the first 3 albums.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And another thing that's fascinating about it is the fact that I'm just kind of looking up some figures here. Yeah, they started off with, like you said, a top 5 single, number 4 cover of a song
Hush, Joe South.
Joe South, and it's a rock classic. Yes. And yet, the Deep Purple Mark I, other than that, most people aren't aware of, what it is. So, but every band's got to start somewhere. And, Deep Purple came out, their first album, 1968, Shades of Deep Purple. And that's another thing about these albums. They've been reissued so many times. There are various variants of the cover art, all based on the same picture of the band. This is a US 8-track on GRT, but there have been several incarnations. The first time I found this album was in the early 90s, and this was, what I'm getting at, where the first 3 albums are interesting in that they've never really landed under any one rights owner. They've been reissued countless times, and sometimes very, very cheap looking. This is the first cassette I found, Shades of Deep Purple. Very blurry photo. This is what it looks like on the side. And just all around cheap looking. This is what I call a truck stop tape. But yet this is an actual album. This is the bona fide Deep Purple debut, and this contains that top 5 single, Hush. And yet it looks so low budget. The vinyl I have of that is a Canadian vinyl, and it's on Tetragrammaton, which was their original label, but in Canada it was distributed by Polydor. So they at least had a major label distributing them in some markets. And yeah, I think I have the same CD you have, the 2000 reissue, which is a very well done reissue.
It's
Mine's
really good.
Mine's a US copy because it's on Spitfire. But yeah, all of those, all of these reissues, you've got you've got it like this, but then you turn it around and you've got the full cover. And what I think a lot of people might be surprised is that how many songs on this first album are cover songs. There's a lot of covers on here. Hush in itself is a cover now. I think a lot of people associate it with Deep Purple. It's been covered several times since then. In the 90s, a band called Kula Shaker redid it and had a big hit with it. I think that's how a lot of the younger generation knows the song. But I would have to say that their version is based on the Deep Purple version. But it's also got version of I'm So Glad, which I think is a Cream song. It's got Help by the Beatles, and it's got a very, very strange rendition of Hey Joe, best known for Jimi Hendrix cover of it. But there are some clues on this first album as to what Deep Purple would become. And I think you don't have to look any further than the first track on the album, which is the instrumental and the address. Would you say this is a pretty good way to point into the future of what this band would become? Because it's an instrumental and it primarily concentrates on the interplay between Blackmore, Pace, and John Lord.
Well, I'm going to say that this album is basically the most valuable players are John Lord and the rhythm section. So Hammond is right up in the mix. And then you've got Nick Simper, who plays a real throbbing, groovy bass. And Ian Pace, he's on fire. The drumming in the first three albums is phenomenal. He does these really breakneck, fast little fills. Yeah. And I think Richie's more behind the scenes. And he's actually said in interviews that he was finding his feet. So he does a lot of effects. There's a lot of wah-wah and a lot of reverb. You don't get that neoclassical flash. And, he's kind of finding his way. But I agree with you. They're making a bit of a statement. But does it give a pointer to Mark II? Not really. Because this album is so drenched in its pop sensibilities and John Lord and Ian Pace in the rhythm section dominating proceedings.
Yeah. But right away you can tell this is a band that can play really, really, really well together. Another song that kind of makes me think of the Deep Purple to follow, and I think this is a song that they would do into the Mark II era, is Mandrake Root.
Yes, and that got played a fair amount in the early sessions of Mark II live. Yeah. So that actually went into Mark II. And I think even, some later Deep Purple, Richie would play little, like how Richie, his mind's wandering and he plays these little licks of songs, whether it's the mule or whatnot. I think he's played Mandrake Root, brought it back in. So that was a signature. That was a signature song of the Mark I. Yeah, most definitely.
Their rendition of Help is very different than the Beatles version.
Love it. Do you like it? I think it's a really tasty version.
They slowed it way down and they kind of made it its own thing.
John Lennon said that he originally had the idea of writing Help as a ballad. And it's on record that Paul McCartney heard this version by Deep Purple and he really grooved on it. He really, really liked it. So that's high praise indeed.
You don't get a higher compliment than that.
Absolutely. But I love the way they slow it down and they kind of make it really soulful.
Yeah.
Rod Evans, his vocals are quite soulful on this album. I was thinking about Rod Evans and how I rank him in the Deep Purple story. And let's be honest. You couldn't imagine Rod would sing Child in Time or Mistreated. Right. But you can totally imagine him singing some of these pop songs, like Help.
He's a crooner. When I've been listening to a lot of these albums and I hear a lot of Elvis. I don't know about you, but I hear a lot of Elvis.
Yeah, well, everything points back to that, doesn't it?
Yeah, but directly. I mean, there's certain phrasings he uses, like, if they'd have covered an Elvis song, he would have been the right guy for it, right? Absolutely. Even Neil Diamond, who they do eventually cover. I hear
And
a lot of
Scott
that.
Walker. Are you familiar with Scott Walker or the Walker Brothers? Very
Yeah,
much that really baritone,
yeah,
that really stylish croon. So influential to lots of rock singers. But
yeah.
yeah,
Not in North America, but in the UK, the Walker Brothers were huge, huge, huge.
yep,
Um,
yep,
and their version of "Hey Joe," I mean, it's in typical Purple fashion. Before the song starts, there's a long instrumental jam. That's Deep Purple.
yeah, yeah. I don't think this is successful. So I don't think all the cover songs that they do through the 3 hour albums are totally successful. And this one is probably not as successful as Hush or Help in my book. It kind of meanders a little bit.
Yeah. And it probably doesn't help that, no pun intended, that they were such well-known songs in their initial incarnations. But here's a band with talent to spare, and they had a top five
Absolutely.
hit right off the bat, but none of these albums certified, I don't think.
No, no, but who knows if if it got recertified, it might have crawled up. Can I quickly ask you the question? What do you think of Help? I mean, not sorry, correction, Hush.
I love it.
To
I
me,
love it. It's classic.
I
It's a
think this is
classic.
the album that wraps around that song,
Yeah, it's the
and
centerpiece. There's no question. Yeah, John
and
Lord's organ solo is amazing, and
unbelievable.
the groove they go into. It's, I mean, I love the fact that in this relatively obscure period of this band, their lives, this huge hit single, and it's this
Yes,
version of it. It's not another version of it. It's this. This is the version of Hush everybody knows.
the quintessential version, and that organ solo, it builds, it
Yeah,
builds. It's normally you imagine in a Deep Purple song, the centerpiece is the guitar solo, but
yeah,
no, John Lord takes the spotlight and it builds. And then when Ian Pace comes in with that drum roll, oh man, it's exciting. It
yeah,
really, I think that's one of John Lord's finest keyboard performances committed to
yeah,
vinyl. It's sensational. And Quentin Tarantino brought it back for the soundtrack and the movie Once Upon a Time in Hollywood,
yeah.
and another song which we'll talk about on the following albums. So Quentin's a bit of a fan of Mark One Deep Purple.
Which is, it's really cool when you have people in positions of that can do something with it. I love when that
Yes,
happens. So I think we should talk about this. There's a few bonus tracks in this 2000 version. Most of them are alternate takes, but what do you think about the outtake Shadows?
it's okay, but you can understand why it didn't sort of get on the album.
Yeah,
But I they did lots of different songs, and not a lot of them survived.
yeah,
And I will recommend, and I don't know if you've got this, the Deep Purple BBC sessions.
I do know.
Um, yes, and this came out about, I think, about 10 years ago. And a lot of British acts, it was a stock and trade that you go into the
Oh yeah,
studios and record in the BBC. And there was a show called Top Gear. And, this is a precursor to John Peel and all that. And the versions of these songs are even better than what's on the record. They're
yeah,
kind of more live and they pop out. So uh, there's not a lot of recordings of Mark One, and what you do here, it's a little bit scratchy, but there's evidence that they really popped out. It was much more lively and it sprung out more than what was on record.
yeah, yeah. I mean, that was a rite of passage for bands coming through, right? I mean, Led Zeppelin, famously their BBC sessions. That was really exciting when those finally were officially released. When Queen put out, Live at the B, but then they expanded on air. There's some fantastic performances on there. Nazareth at the BBC is really good. Yeah, it was a way of not just alternate takes, but yeah, they're more live sounding because they were live. They were recorded live as the band playing.
Yep.
So very quickly, as was the case back in these days, same year, 1968, there appeared the second Deep Purple album, The Book of Taliesin. And I like this cover. It's very old timey looking to me.
Yes.
I like how it's got the band members listed over here, and a little bit of, see, mine's not a gatefold. Mine
Well,
is, it says it's made in Canada. It's on Tetragrammaton again.
I'm cheating a little bit. This is a reissue because it's mono.
mono. Okay. So
And I'll come out straight off the bat. This is my favorite of the three, and it sounds beautiful. Mono is got its rewards. It sounds really warm.
yeah, there's a natural warmth to it for sure. And
Absolutely.
to illustrate the point of how many times these albums are reissued, this is my cassette version, which is on Passport Records.
Yep.
And this was reissued, it says 1988. We got this version. Now it actually has a little bit of credits in it, unlike the previous one. It's got and I've got that version on CD as well. I do not have the 8-track version of Book of Taliesin as of yet, but I've got this UK on Eagle. Maybe that's the same one you have of Book of Taliesin. Yep. And of course, like the last one, it's got the full cover on the inside. I like the, they did this on shades as well, but I like the design of the CD itself too. And yeah, I mean, it's, what, months ahead? But
3 months.
Yeah, but
3 months. It's inconceivable.
Yeah, a big difference in the way the band's playing together. And I think there's even more signs of what Deep Purple would become on here. I mean, there's nothing really pop about Listen, Learn, Read On. That song is at a breakneck pace.
Punchy.
Yeah.
It comes at you. It's a great opener.
Yeah.
I think this album sparkles. So just a little bit of background for the folks. They were told by the record company before they went out on tour, and there was a lot of interest in America. Hush went top 5. The album was doing okay. Before they go to America and do that tour, they had to go back in the studio and have more songs. So they were under the pump, and they've come back with a mighty fine album in such a short space of time. Folks, 3 months.
Yeah.
I read that last night. I couldn't believe it. You just wouldn't think 3 months, and another album pops out.
I think that tells you how hard they were working and also how much they were playing, because it's an improvement. They've improved as a band together. But there is a little bit of that confusion in these early days, because they would be working on one album while touring to support the one before, right? But yeah, I think this album is a stronger album than the debut. There's still some covers on it, but another song that really, I think, got a lot of play in Mark II is another instrumental, Ring That Neck.
Yes.
I mean, when that starts out, like that sounds like Deep Purple, even more so than And the Address.
Yes. No, that's like Mandrake Root. That's another signature song. And again, it's another one that Ritchie has referred to, through the years of playing with Deep Purple. I wouldn't be surprised he's even pulled out that riff in Rainbow, but it's a signature Mark I.
And that's a Blackmore trademark, because I mean, diehard fans, and we've talked about this. You listen to Rainbow Band of Shape on Fire Dance, Ritchie premieres the riff to The Battle Rages On 10 years before its time. Like, there it is.
He's a great recycler. He loves recycling your riffs. And I always say, if you're going to recycle from the best.
And one of the songs on the Stranger in Us All album is essentially Can't Happen Here Again.
Yes.
And his response, I think Doogie White mentioned that to him. He said, "Oh, well, that's one of mine anyway." So yeah,
why not?
Very non-committal. Another cover that was the only other song from this era that hit in the States, it hit number 22, was their version of Neil Diamond's Kentucky Woman, which I really like their version.
I love it. It's so punchy. It's actually in my head at the moment because I've been playing these albums over the last week, and it's so damn catchy. Again, that was in the Quentin Tarantino movie, had a lot of radio airplay, and guys, Neil Diamond gets panned a lot because he was the king of schmaltz from the mid-70s onwards. But gee, that early Neil Diamond, he had game. He had game. He was a great songwriter.
They do a great version of it. And I remember being in radio. I remember when I was covering a morning shift, which I didn't often do, but I was doing a morning show when I read that John Lord had passed away. And for some reason, the song that popped into my head to play Kentucky Woman. Because I mean, it's got the like it's got those classic organ stabs from him. Really good. Didn't do as well as Hush. It doesn't have the doesn't quite have the notoriety, but I think it should. I think it's every bit as good. And what's really odd to me is that they do the same thing on this album, and for the fourth track, they do a cover, but they have a prelude. So on Shades of Deep Purple, they have Prelude Happiness going into their version of I'm So Glad. And now on Book of Taliesin, they have Exposition, which goes into another Beatles cover, another slowed down Beatles cover, We Can Work It Out.
I like that one as well.
And I think this one works too. It's not meant to be a substitute for the Beatles original. It's just another interpretation.
Absolutely. No, it really works. They slow it down. It's great.
Yeah. And what do you think of like the rest of the album? You've got Shield or The Shield.
Shield is a masterpiece.
Then,
it is an absolute. I cannot say enough about how much I love The Shield. I think that is an underrated gem.
Yeah.
And it's one that I gravitate to through the three albums. It's a psychedelic masterpiece. It sort of unfurls itself.
Yeah.
It's just compositionally, the arrangements, it's inventive, and it really poses an interesting question. Could this have been the direction that Deep Purple may have gone instead of going hard rock? A lot of folks say, imagine if they went down the direction of The Shield and went down into more of a progressive path.
They certainly had the chops.
What a Deep Purple would have been.
Yeah, they certainly had the chops for it. But
yeah, do you like this song?
I do, and I wonder if they ever did this one post Mark I.
No, I don't think so. But they should. It's a really, really good song.
Then there's Anthem, popular title. What do you think of that one?
It's okay. It's okay. I think the album starts to fall down a little bit. River Deep, Mountain High. Again, this is another cover that they just don't quite, it's not for me. I mean, this is one of the greatest rock soul songs of all time. You think of Phil Spector, Tina Turner. You've got to be, it's ballsy that they've done a cover of it, but you've got to do something that really sticks with the crowd. And I think it's a little bit sort of lackadaisical. I'm not convinced. I don't think it's a convincing cover song. Do you like this version?
No, and it's way too long. It's 10 minutes long. It's like 10, 11.
Yes.
There's not enough there to sustain the interest, in my opinion. So that's the album proper. The bonus, I love the fact that we have these bonus, songs to listen to. There's more, there's more originals here. There's, or at least more songs that weren't on the other albums. Oh, no, 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 which is funny because in 3 years' time on Fireball, there's a song called No, No, No. But what do you think of Oh, No, No, No?
Yeah, as I said, I don't think any of these are compelling that you would think, oh, okay, this should have made the album.
None of these are oh, they should have did that,
essential.
Put that on instead of this. It's just nice to hear them.
Yeah, It's All Over, Hey Bop, a rebop. No, it's they're sort of like studio workouts.
Yeah.
And Nick Simper said there was a ton of stuff, but unfortunately, the tapes are missing or lost. Maybe they're somewhere in the BBC archives, but it would be really interesting to see.
Yeah.
But, Tim, I've got a quick question for you. So 3 months is such a short time, and folks will maybe correct me because I think that the UK version of this album came out a lot later, but definitely in America, the space between the first and the second was very short. Do you think that Deep Purple Mark I may have had more of a chance because there was a bit of a dive popularity if this album was staggered or deferred into the following year?
Maybe. Yeah. If they'd have had another song off Shades of Deep Purple that did what Hush did, they might have been able to sustain that longer. Obviously, things worked out quite well for most of the guys, but Yeah, I think that it was, there's such a thing as being out of the spotlight too long, but then there's such a thing as staying in the spotlight a little too long. Maybe going to the well too soon after you've just been there. Maybe that was a little bit of it. And plus, I'm going to say, like, tetragrammaton, what is that? It's not. If they'd assigned to a major label straight away, if they'd assigned to EMI or Warner, like they, like they
Yes.
would, I think it would have made a difference, because they just didn't have that label support. There were so many. When you look at old charts and you look at the record labels they were on, for all of the RCAs and MCAs and Mercuries and Columbia, you see all these different labels that you've only ever seen once. So I think that was part of the problem. They didn't land a major label deal right off the bat. And I also think that leads to why these albums have been reissued so many times and in so many different forms. The rights are just kind of floating out there,
Absolutely.
So 1969, again, probably less than a calendar year later, we get the third Deep Purple album. This time they've opted for completely self-titling with this striking cover based on, I'm going to get his name wrong. Bosch is the last name. It starts with H, but I can't think of how it's actually.
Yeah.
Hieronymus Bosch or something like that. And this visual, this has been used several times for several album covers. I don't know if anybody remembers, this is a Martin Popoff band. He used to talk about this band all the time. They were called the Big F. I'm pretty sure that their first album cover was just this. Like they just zoomed in on that. And it seems to me Black Sabbath's greatest hits is a portion of this too, but I could be wrong.
Absolutely, I think so too. We did talk about it in the classic album cover. But I was just putting up an album cover which you may not have seen. This is unique to the Australian region. It was just simply in purple.
Okay, yeah. I don't think I have seen that, but maybe you've shown me that before, but
yeah, probably
but it's
on
the
the
same.
show.
Yeah.
Yep.
And actually that's what this looks like on the inside, what's on the back there. And this is called, this painting it's a really hellish sort of landscape, and the more you look at it, the worse it gets. But I believe it's called the Garden of Earthly Delights. And you can see kind of primitively juxtaposed or pasted in here, there is a photo of the band, so a little bit lighter in color.
Nice.
And what's interesting about this version of this that I have, this is a Canadian version, and it's actually on Warner Brothers, as is this cassette tape that I've got of it. So it's a little bit more official looking to me. And again, I've got the same, the 2000 reissue, again, very well done. And I like how on each of these there's sheet music in the back, and you can tell it's for one of the songs on each of the album. I think that's kind of a nice touch.
Beautifully put together. I actually got it in a 3-fer. I don't know if you saw that in Canada. That came out.
I found these ones separately, but yeah.
Yeah, folks, if you ever see these sort of things, and if the packaging looks good and it's actually a CD and not a piece of cardboard with no inner sleeve, because you get those cheapy where you have 5 for the price of 1 and they're just a piece of cardboard with nothing. But if you see something like that, grab it.
And they usually fall right out, and they're not very well done. So this is actually my favorite of the three. I really like this one. Yeah, I really like this one. I hear more of the Deep Purple that would follow. And Ian Pace on this first track, Chasing Shadows. What a workout.
His drumming is phenomenal on
he
these
doesn't let up.
albums.
Yeah,
absolutely. He is just a dynamo. And look, I don't groove on this album as much as the first two. I just think that the first 4 tracks are a little bit of a chore. I appreciate they're going outside their wheelhouse and they're doing different dynamics, different time signatures. A lot of it's slowed down. It's very psychedelic. There's a lot of vanilla fudge. And let's face it, if you wanted to compare Deep Purple, Mark, one, those three albums. Vanilla Fudge is probably the closest in the wheelhouse.
That's what they did. They took classic songs and they made heavier versions of them. They slowed them down. I mean, what was their big hit? Their version of "You Keep Me Hanging On." And
Yes.
barely recognizable as the Supreme song or Kim Wilde.
Yep.
But yeah, very much so.
But to my ears, I think Blackmore, Pace, and Lord were probably reading the tea leaves and seeing that the world around them was changing. And Led Zeppelin 1 was definitely a game changer.
Yeah.
And that was just electric. And, you know, things had to change. But look, I appreciate it's experimental, but it meanders. And to me, the album only doesn't start to lift until The Painter, where there's a little bit of a groove and, you know, that little bit of a swing. But it's very much 1960s music, 1969. It's very much for time. If you hadn't heard any tracks and you put the headphones on and you close your eyes, you go, "Oh, this is kind of that late 60s."
Oh yeah, it couldn't be any later than 1969. It's definitely time stamped. What's interesting about this album is that there is only one cover song on it, and it's a Donovan. Is it Lelania? I believe it's a Donovan song.
Donovan, yes.
Yeah, and no songs off of this became either lasting, songs on the charts, or even I think in the Deep Purple catalog. I think one of my favorites, it's funny you mentioned The Painter. I really like that one. And maybe I like Chasing Shadows so much that I can kind of let the next few go. And then The Painter comes on and like, yeah. And
it's got a bit of groove.
I really like Why Didn't Rosemary, which is a very clever take on Rosemary's Baby, the famous horror movie. And the line is, why didn't Rosemary take the pill? And it's just, so it's like dark humor. It's got that dark humor. And Deep Purple would do that from time to time. They would have that sort of dark humor element in their songs.
Some of the lyrics are a bit whiffy. I think there's a song La Di Da, Rod Evans. He's got some interesting wordplay in some of these songs. I don't think he's a top shelf lyricist, at least not on this album.
But I think one of the best songs didn't even make the album, but it's kind of well known outside of it, and that's Amaretta.
Oh, Richie and the Wah Wah.
Yeah.
I love it. I love it. And to me, that's like Mandrake Root, Bring That Let, Amaretta. I put them, top shelf Mark 1. If you had a
compilation. The difference is that this one has lyrics. It was written for cast Amaretta Marks, who was a cast member of Hair. Okay. And it's made a few compilations actually. So I think that other people agree that there's something to this song. But obviously, it wasn't. This isn't the reason that people talk about Deep Purple to this day, but it's the building blocks. And it's a shame that there's never been any definitive. You can go back now and buy reissues of In Rock and Machine Head, and they're all Warner, Rhino, big label, big distribution, get it into the stores. And yet, other than those 2000 redos, you're still stuck with, have things like this floating out in the marketplace, these really cheap versions of the first three albums. It's kind of a shame. So that's it. I mean, after that, so it seems to me, and you would know this better than me, Peter, there was a little bit of shenanigans going on with, all of a sudden here's Ian Gillan and Roger Glover when, the Rod Evans and Nick Simper are still there. What's the story that happened there? There was a little bit of that going on.
Yeah. So the story was simply that I think Richie was concerned that Rod didn't have the chops to sing the sort of music that they wanted to do. So Led Zeppelin was the game changer, and they wanted to go in a direction that was electrified, powerful, in rock. And the thing that scratches my head a little bit is about Nick Simper, but maybe they thought, I think Richie was aware of episode 6, and to get to Ian, maybe they had to do it as a dual package, to get Roger Glover and Ian Gillan, because Nick Simper's bass playing is mighty fine on these three albums. Nick Simper, it's kind of funky.
Yeah.
Or maybe he thought Nick Simper, they wanted a bass player that was much more linear, much more rooted on 4-on-the-floor rock, and that was the sort of style. But I think Nick got a little bit ripped off. And, even the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, they inducted everybody else
Yeah,
in
that doesn't
Mark
even make
1,
that
2,
doesn't
and
even
3. But
yeah,
Nick Simper wasn't even included. Nobody played bass, apparently, which is just
that doesn't
bloody
make any
ridiculous.
sense. Yeah.
So I think it was a
I could see
package.
them sort of blackballing both Evans and Simper, but to mention Evans, who they had litigation with, which we'll get to, and not
Yep.
Simper. Oh yeah. But Nick Simper is somebody, he might have been able to evolve into the next phase where I hate to say it, but I think Blackmore was right. Rod Evans, just good singer, but he just wasn't the right type of singer for
It didn't
he,
have the range.
he wasn't a screamer. He wasn't, he couldn't do that wailing, which the Robert Plant style, and Ian Gillan, even though he's very much his own man, that's what at the time, that's what Blackmore wanted. So I think, then we get that's another interesting thing about Deep Purple. Everybody talks about In Rock, but you forget there's one more that's in between there, and that is Concerto for Group and Orchestra, which in the liner notes to this are interesting because you read about how Ian Gillan and Roger Glover ended up signing copies of this when they did that show, because people didn't realize it wasn't them that was on this. But so what happened then? Of course, Deep Purple put out In Rock, and the total shift happens. The total shift happens, and Deep Purple became one of the biggest rock bands in the world. So the Mark I stuff, of course, wisely enough, labels know that Deep Purple being a recognizable brand, they're going to try and repackage it. So the first thing I want to talk about, I believe this came out in 1972, and it's one of many albums called Best of Deep Purple. I've got a better version of this to show you, but that's a very, very beat up 8-track. It's just one of many compilations from the Mark I era. This is a Canadian cassette, which is on Polydor.
Right, I've never seen that one before.
I kind of like the design. It's very like Book of Taliesin. It's very old timey. So here's the vinyl version and the best picture of this. So I have the story behind this. My good friend John, who's been on the shows before, he's been my partner in crime looking for music for decades. His parents had this record, and his parents didn't have a lot of rock albums. And we were out in the living room one night listening to, they had a stereo. So we had a few vinyl albums at this point. So we were listening to what we had. And then just for a sort of a lark, I said, hey, let's put this on, because I always read about Deep Purple being this influential, metal group. And I also knew, being a big Whitesnake fan, I knew at one time or another David Coverdale was in this group. Let's see what this sounds like. Well, unfortunately, this is not where I'd start anyone off with Deep Purple. It just isn't. The very first thing on this is River Deep Mountain High. And we got a little ways into that. So that actually kept me from researching further into Deep Purple for quite a while. I eventually heard the right songs. But so I remember this cover very, very well, but also the back cover is kind of creepy. I mean, look at Rod Evans. He's got like a Dracula thing going on there. Yeah, this is another Canadian edition on Polydor, again, a major label. So,
see, this is an example where the band hasn't got tight control on what's released.
exactly.
So when the band hasn't got control of their catalog, you've got renegades that can just put out any sort of wobble type stuff.
And when you call something Best of Deep Purple, and the unsuspecting fan picks it up thinking they're going to get Smoke on the Water and Lazy and Highway Star,
yes,
no, none of those songs are there. So it just creates confusion, right? More of an official looking compilation came out again, 1972, this time on Warner Brothers, called Purple Passages, which is really hard to read on this 8-track, I realized. Also got this very old US cassette with one of these hard plastic slipcases where the tape is sort of held in by friction. And again,
I haven't seen them in years. Oh, wow.
So it's funny. I've got 3 of these, and they're all on Warner Brothers. I've got a Deep Purple one, I've got Alice Cooper, Muscle of Love, and Fleetwood Mac, Then Play On, and they all got this
Yeah,
hard
I
classic
can.
bass.
I think my eldest brother, in the early '70s, when cassettes were the rage, that was the way they were packaged in the slip. That was great.
Yeah,
Oh, I haven't seen that in years. You
I've
reminded
never
me.
seen one newer than 76, so that must have been when they
Yeah,
stopped.
73, 72. Yeah.
So here's the vinyl of Purple Passages. Again, very, very hard to read. It does say Deep Purple there in sort of this
Hmm.
splotchy, and it's another compilation. This one was unique though, and had more to offer because this actually has Emeretta on it, which might have been hard to find at the time. And it's got a nice gatefold that talks basically about the history of Mark One. And only recently,
Mm,
I found a Japanese CD of this that was issued in 1993. And I got to say, I've always liked the looks of these Warner CDs.
yes.
So this is actually a pretty good compilation. It's And the Address, Hey Joe, Hush, Emeretta, Chasing Shadows, Bird is Flown, White and Rosemary, Ring That Neck, The Shield, Mandrake Root, Kentucky Woman, and April. I mean, it hits a lot of the high points from this era. So
And it plays well. The Japanese have fantastic
yeah,
CDs.
it's a good
The
sounding.
pressing is just,
Yeah,
yeah, really
I
spick.
don't think this was released in North America on CD. So
Mm, that's a
uh,
good win. Good
yeah,
find.
um, and that's it. I mean that was the Mark One albums. So you get the three albums, you get those scattered songs that were put on the B sides.
Yep.
So what happened, of course, is that Deep Purple became huge. I know Rod Evans ended up in Captain Beyond.
Two fantastic albums. I did one on Rock Daydream Nation and did a show with Reed Little. Really
How did
fantastic.
I've never heard either of those, Peter? How does that compare to what he did in Deep Purple?
It's a mixture. There's a little bit of Santana, there's prog rock, there's a little bit of hard rock. It's like a potpourri of all these different musical styles. Stoner rock.
Yeah.
Somebody described it even, here it like it's kind of like Deep Sabbath. So
Okay.
if you can wrap your head around that, but
And the
it's
album
really
covers, I've seen the
worth
album covers, and they kind of
investigating.
fit that stoner
Yeah,
rock, but
yeah,
they were
absolutely.
never really big. Like they didn't.
No, not
You know,
huge, not huge. But they're getting recognised. Bit more of a cult band. People are looking back and going, "Wow, what a great album!"
yeah.
But,
Now, unfortunately for Rod Evans, his reputation was sort of sullied uh, turn of the decade. So, of course, as we know, Deep Purple, the entity, this would have been Deep Purple Mark IV, with Tommy Bolin replacing Blackmore. One album, a good album, Come Taste the Band, and they sort of implode. Tommy Bolin would die tragically, very very young. But the band, sort of imploded to the point where, if I'm hearing this correctly, essentially, when David Coverdale sort of tendered his resignation, he was told there was nothing to resign from. The band
mm,
was over. But yet, the members of the band were very much active in the years to follow. There was Gillan and Rainbow and Whitesnake. Well, my understanding is that it was a concert promoter, and I don't know the concert promoter's name, that came up with the idea of sort of resurrecting dormant band names. I believe he'd already done it with Steppenwolf when the next name to come up on his list was Deep Purple. Do you want to pick up this story and what happened with what we'll call the fake purple?
yeah. So you had Rod Evans and a group of four others. I can't recite their names, but
Was it the guitar player
it's all
Mike Lintz or something like that?
yeah.
Yeah.
Look, I haven't got the details with me, and they did a mini tour of America and Mexico.
Yeah.
And a lot of punters went to the shows expecting to see Richie and playing the classic hits of Mark II. The way it was promoted was quite deceptive. People were thinking, "Oh, Deep Purple, there's a reunion," and when the show went on, it was a mixture of Mark One, which witnesses say was competent, and a mixture of Mark II and Mark III songs, which was actually diabolical.
Yeah.
And there is some footage on YouTube,
Yep.
and it's terrible. And when the punters or the audience realized that there was no Richie, no John, no Pacey, no Lord, there was actually rioting in the audience. Chairs would be flung up on the stage, and it wasn't a great set of affairs. So
Yeah.
Rod probably needed the money. And when Deep Purple management in UK got wind of it, there was litigation, and they put an injunction on the whole thing. And there was basically went to some sort of a court judgment, and basically there was a penalty, and the result of that penalty was that I think it was a £675,000 fine or something. It was a big number for that day.
Right.
And Rod Evans agreed to give up his rights to the Deep Purple Mark I publishing, and he effectively retired from music. And he's up there with Bobby Gentry of where is Rod Evans? It's
Yeah.
I think he's just gone incognito. But it's a bit of a mind. It blows your mind to think that
To think it
they
actually
had
got that far off the
they
ground.
were so ballsy
Yeah.
and so audacious that they think they could swindle the public and just go out and say, "Hey, we're Deep Purple," and there was one guy in Mark I, and just play these shows with a mix of Mark I, II, and III.
Yeah. There's a clip I've seen on YouTube of them doing Smoke on the Water, and it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. But the first thing I noticed was they had to do it in a different key because Rod Evans is such a different singer to Ian Gillan. And also my feeling was that it went on. I'm like, did these guys not rehearse at all? Like, they don't know how
No,
to
very
end the song. They do not know how to end the song live. So it's just a mess. And like I said, I'm surprised it got that far off the drawing board. But again, something that I think needs to be said, this was pre-internet days and news traveled slowly. And also, they were kind of cagey the way they did it. They basically kept it to the States and Mexico, where Whitesnake, Rainbow, and Gillan had no impact in North America at all. Whitesnake and Rainbow had very little at this time. So I think they actually thought they could probably pull a tour off, take the money and run and get away with it. And it's also the lack of intelligence given the audience, who wouldn't recognize that at least that's not Richie Blackmore playing guitar. That is not Richie Blackmore. And the song doesn't sound like that. Okay, when they do Hush, maybe it's okay, but I want to hear Highway Star, I want to hear Space Truckin'. And yeah, it's a weird chapter in their history, and very, very little doubt that is why, because as we know, there's a ton of Deep Purple best ups. There's a ton of Deep Purple compilations. They did 24 Karat Purple in 75. 78, they had When We Rock, We Rock, and When We Roll, We Roll. I kind of like that one because it does have a little bit of Mark I stuff on it. But then the one you showed, Deepest Purple, which is slam, like 12 great songs it's a great, great compilation. That came out in 1980. No Mark I stuff on it. I'm pretty sure that was by design to let you know, here's the people in this band or who are on these tracks. And around that same time is when those BBC recordings that were done in, I think, very, very close to the beginning of Mark II career came out as In Concert, that sort of purplish album with all the different individual photos on it. I don't have it in front of me right now, but there's a reason those things came out. They wanted to let people know, hey, this is Deep Purple. What you just paid money to go see is not. So,
yeah. And it was probably the catalyst for the band getting back together. So there's a sequence of events. The tour,
yes.
okay. So one thing we've got to say, the tour didn't flop. This fake Deep Purple actually attracted crowds.
Yeah.
So that did well. Got publicity. They put out the compilation, the very best of Deep Purple. It went to number one. And then all the bean counters in the record company were thinking, let's put an offer. Let's put an offer to the Fabulous Five. Yeah. And that
It,
then triggered the reunion of 1984 Perfect Strangers, and the rest is history. So there's
you
a
know,
sequence of events.
it's so fascinating to think about that. If Rod Evans hadn't done that, I'm sure that the Mark II lineup would have reunited, but they might not have reunited when they did. Who
Mm.
knows? We might, yeah, and yet, if the offer was put out then, think of the fantastic albums that came out in the meantime. We got Come and Get It. We got Straight Between the Eyes. If you're
Yes.
Born Again, we still got
Oh,
lots of albums, lots of music before Perfect Strangers. But yeah, I'm sure the powers that be said there's money to be made with these five guys, not any other lineup, these five guys back together. And I think that's why there was never any, because by this time in 1980, you had a six-piece Whitesnake lineup with half of Deep Purple. You had Coverdale and
mm,
Lord and now Pace. And but I think that like you said, the bean counters, no. We want the In Rock, we want the Machine Head made in Japan, we want those guys back making a new album. And but and it's kind of a shame because I think that Rod Evans maybe shot himself in the foot, because if he hadn't have done that, you never know. Purple has gone through so many coming and going people. He might have been invited on stage. He might have been at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, where he was, as we talked about, he was inducted. And yet poor Nick Simper wasn't. And yet Nick Simper didn't do anything Nick Simper was not part of that fake Purple.
yeah.
So,
I think it was very cynical. They were trying to get him out of the burrow.
yeah,
I mean, it's just so obvious. They did, because Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is all about TV and
yeah,
putting on an event and getting bands reunited. It's like a glorified VH1 bands reunited, and
yeah.
they wanted to get him out of the burrow, but he didn't take the bait. I'm fascinated with this story about the fake Deep Purple tour and where is Rod Evans, and um, one of his bandmates in Captain Beyond still keeps in contact. He lives in California. He's healthy and he works in the medical industry. So he changed careers. He completely retired from music. So fascinating story. But I think I would love to see a documentary maker do a show on that fake Deep Purple tour. I
Oh,
reckon, getting witness testimonies,
yeah.
interviewing the band members, I reckon there's a great story. It's
Oh man.
fascinating. It's
Yes.
call it the Great Rock and Roll Swindle Part 2.
Yeah.
Because the
I
Sex Pistols already did that, but
I like when they focus in on these little known periods of a band's career. Like I love that documentary, and the name of it's escaping me, but it's the one that talks about the Mark III lineup when they went to,
Singapore, yes,
yes, and there was a death. One of the roadies died. There was an
yes,
accident. That was fascinating. Phoenix, was it
yes,
called Phoenix Rising?
yes, Phoenix
Yeah,
Rising.
that was fascinating to me, and you never hear about that version of the band. So yes, there is a fantastic documentary. We need to get Martin and Banger Films on this, because there's an
Mm,
insanely good documentary to be made about this fake Purple. And this, I don't think it got off the ground, but a similar thing happened in 1974 with Fleetwood Mac, because there were litigations with their uh, first manager. First manager moved. I think I've got this right. Moved to the States, where the band, as it was still in the UK. So he formed this fake Mac. Not, no involvement. But of course, that fell apart really quickly. I don't know how many shows actually happened, but I mean, the first thing people realize is like there's no, they're all guys. Where's Christine McVie at this point, right? Because it wasn't. But yeah, it just shows you how valuable those brands are, those names. People
it's
talk a lot about
intellectual.
brand awareness now, but that's never not been true, because look at this, that we're talking about 1980, over 40 years ago, and money was spent, money was lost, money was sued for over the name, use of the name.
Intellectual property is so important. So if you're in a band, you've got to lock up the rights, because look at the Australian band Little River Band. They were sleeping on the wheel, and a bass player or one of the was one of the non-originals, got the copyright to the band name, and now the originals can't play under the original name of Little River Band. So that's just a very quick example of, you know, not locking in your intellectual property.
You can't rely, you can't be like, well, I thought you did that. Well, I thought you did that. And it turns out nobody did. So yeah, you know, it's like publishing rights, everything. And it's a good cautionary tale, but I think what we're left with is we'd really like to see a documentary on that, the Deep Purple that wasn't.
Totally fascinating. Totally fascinating. If the folks are alive, there's stories to be told.
I'm just looking to see if there is a title from one of those first three albums that would work. Maybe they could go with something like Rim That Neck. It's
Help.
all over. But yeah, so well, but the bottom line is, folks, the Deep Purple Mark I kind of gets a bad reputation. It's an acquired taste. If you're like me and you don't listen to a lot of 60s music, it's going to sound really old to you. But most people have heard Hush. There are other quality tracks. I mean, that's the star. That song is well above. But there's other good stuff too. Give it a shot. It doesn't set you back a lot to find some of these albums. And if you see one for $5, pick it up, give it a listen, see what you think. It's
completely underrated, folks. Check it out. There's some really good tracks.
So, Peter, thank you for doing this. I knew you'd be the guy to talk to about Deep Purple.
Absolute
in any
pleasure.
Form. Rock Daydream Nation, be sure and like and subscribe. And Peter's always pumping out good content. Sometimes he's good enough to let me in on one of his shows, and we always have a good time. So, folks, hope you enjoyed this look, this little retrospective of Deep Purple Mark I. Like and comment below, and links below to support the channel in various ways. And thank you for watching this edition of Tim's Vinyl Confessions. Go listen to some Mark I Deep Purple.